Hi and welcome back. It's Hannah here again from Blue Ferret Boarding with Snaffles, who is a complete cuddlebug. This is who you saw last week as well. Still the same dude, still a complete snufflebug. Aren't you, dude? So, carrying on from last week, talking about breeding versus, or breeders versus rescues, I want to talk about breeding and responsible versus irresponsible, and this is going to be a very thin ice situation for me, and I'm going to possibly upset people here. So let's have the caveat that this is my personal feelings and thoughts, and this is kind of where our stand and our line in the sand is for Blue Ferret Boarding. That does not mean that I am never going to speak to breeders, or I am never going to speak to this person or that person. This is just my thoughts. So there are breeders who do it as a form of main income, and that is their job. A lot of breeders in the UK are fantastic. The quality of the ferrets that they're giving and their care for them and their love of ferrets is so clear. And these guys are just fantastic at what they do. So I have no beef with that particularly. My only concern is that, as I mentioned last week, there are already so many ferrets in rescues that I personally feel we should be looking at giving homes to those ferrets that already exist, as opposed to creating more ferrets that need homes. However, like I say, that's my thoughts. It does not mean that I'm going to be rude to breeders, because they're doing a great job. And if you happen to follow the page a lot, you will have seen a few months ago that I put a live post about a bunch of ferrets, 21 ferrets that we'd been looking after and got sent to America to a breeder. So again, you could say, well, hang on a minute here, Hannah, this is a bit of double level, you know, this is a bit of hypocrisy going on. But again, I stand by what I'm saying. And especially in America, they have a particularly, and I'm going to name it, I don't care. There is a company called Marshall's, and they are called Marshall's Ferrets. And I don't have first-hand experience of these ferrets, so I can't say this for sure. But you hear stories that Marshall's ferrets aren't perhaps the healthiest ferrets, and certainly we know that they often neuter their ferrets very early, which can lead to a lot of issues and a lot of health issues with the ferrets and with the kits that are coming from these ferret farms such as Marshall's. So the chap in America is doing a wonderful thing for the American ferret and the American gene pool by getting a load of really healthy British ferrets, and he was really clear when I was working with him that he wanted ferrets that were not at all related, no relations at all. We were getting them from different parts of the country to make sure that these guys were separate and different. And his idea is literally that he is going to re-inject fresh genes into the American gene pool. And so for people in America and in the states of America where owning ferrets is legal, certainly I would be saying go to these private breeders, buy your ferrets from these private breeders that are great and that have gone to this amount of trouble and, dare I say, expense to really get healthy ferrets. That takes a lot of dedication and a lot of love for ferrets, and so for me, that's why I did that, because I felt it was a really good cause. As I've said before, you have those breeders who breed Angora or semi-Angora, and again, those aren't necessarily ferrets you're going to see in the wild, but there are no such thing as a wild ferret, but those aren't ferrets that you see day to day, so they tend to be something that is bred. So you are going to get breeders for that. So there are the responsible breeders who are doing it as a business. Then there are what I call the backyard breeders. Bearing in mind, as I speak as of today, my understanding is that you do not need a license to breed ferrets. And the ferret register that you register owning ferrets is still voluntary. But backyard breeders are literally people who have a couple of ferrets and they breed them and they sell on the ferrets. Now, as I said last time, there are backyard breeders and backyard breeders. There are some people who do this, they work their ferrets and they breed from those ferrets. And these ferrets that come from here are really healthy. They make sure that the stock that they're breeding from are healthy, are different, are not, there's no inbreeding or anything like that. And the ferrets have been handled, they've been socialized, and the ferrets that you get from there, for all it's a backyard breeder, they're loved, they're handled, and they're cared for, and it's great. What they're not necessarily, however, is vaccinated against CD, canine distemper, neutered, or microchipped. And again, that's not a judgment, that's just this is how it is. Be aware of that when you buy a ferret from a backyard breeder, even the good ones, the likelihood is they won't have those three things. So these are costs you are going to have to pay for on top of buying the ferret. And this is where the issues come, because people then buy the ferret, brilliant ferret, well, in good health, can't afford to chip them, can't afford to get them vaccinated for canine distemper, can't afford to neuter them. Ferret gets ill, ferret gets out, ferret gets lost, they can't trace it back because they're not chipped, or the ferret is then comes into season. If it's a if it's a female, she'll come into season, and you then have to breed that ferret, borrow somebody else's hob to breed the ferret to bring it out of season, because it's cheaper than getting them jabbed or neutered. Cue another litter, and now we have the backyard breeding that perhaps isn't so responsible, and we also have potentially a photobombing cat. They don't like to be missed out, do they, Snaps? No, they don't. So sometimes the irresponsible backyard breeding is through ignorance, and I don't mean that in a rude sort of ignorant, I mean as in just people who don't perhaps have the knowledge. And sometimes it's through willful ignorance and immoral lack of care, as it were. So let's move on to those. You've got those backyard breeders who perhaps can't be bothered to neuter, can't be bothered to spend the money, the time, whatever. So they just breed their Jill with any hob that's around, doesn't matter, just any hob. They then have a litter of kits, think this is going to be a nice little earner, I'll sell the kits, there's what, 6 to 8 kits in a litter, I'm going to sell these kits for 10, 20 quid, nice little earner, thank you very much. And he sells them to his mate who's got a little girl who thinks they're dead sweet when they're young. They are dead sweet when they're young, but they don't last very long being dead sweet, because as soon as they start biting and they start finding the world with their teeth, that's what they're going to do. And it's at that point they need socializing. They need to be shown where the boundaries are. Just like any other animal, you need to say these are where the boundaries are. And quite often in these instances, what I call irresponsible breeding, this doesn't happen. And I've seen it with my own eyes, where somebody has bought a ferret from a breeder, she brought the ferret back, she hasn't been told what the ferret ate before. It turns out that those ferrets were on raw food, she'd given them kibble. Well, these dudes didn't know what kibble was, so they weren't eating it, so they were hungry. They were scared because they hadn't been handled very often, and now suddenly they're in a house with a dog and with children and lots of new smells. They're hungry, they're in a new environment, they're not used to being handled, and so when she took them out, they bit her, and they bit her hard. Let's just say involved accident and emergency. Is that the fault of the ferret? Personally, I don't think so. That's the fault of the breeder. And when she contacted the breeder and said, look, this is a bit too much for me, I thought I could cope, but I can't, she couldn't get hold of the breeder. So what did she do? She did the best thing she could in the situation. She contacted the rescue and somebody from the rescue came, picked them up, and now those dudes are in foster care being socialised and handled. Just see where I'm going with this whole circle. So when I say there's breeding and breeding and breeding, hopefully you can start to see what I'm talking about here. So if you insist for whatever reasons in buying your ferret from a breeder, please be aware of what type of breeder it is. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to join a Facebook group, speak to your local rescue to see what questions you need to ask before going to a breeder, or better still, contact our local rescue or a rescue near you, and I'll put a link up to where you can find rescues near you. If you're in a different country and you're wondering about this, because obviously we're UK centric here, just get in touch and I'll do my best to put you in touch with people who can help. I'll see you next week when we're carrying on this theme. Take care.